ジタルデビルストーリー女神転生2ナムコ
Yo, I'm Kurose, and happy very late New Year's. It's currently January 17th. At the time of this recording, Jesus Christ. But if you are curious about, what happened to that Parasite Eve video I said I was going to do, COVID happened. It was not fun. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. You see, we have a sequel on our hands, one that's way better than the original, and does not feel like a fucking gauntlet. But before we go and, jump into that, let's actually do a little quick lesson on NES sequels. Trust me, it'll make sense in a minute.
During the NES era of gaming, making a sequel to a successful game was basically a new concept. Unlike movies and books where you just up the stakes of a conflict and further develop the characters from the original, when developing a sequel for a game, you had to make it better with improved gameplay, graphics, story, and etc. etc. As a result, we had a mix of good sequels and very iffy sequels. The trend was that either a sequel to a game made great improvements from the original yet was still familiar like Mega Man 2, or you had a sequel which completely changes the identity of the game like Simon's Quest and Zelda 2. And then comes Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei 2, a standalone sequel to the first Megami Tensei and released on April 6, 1990. The game focuses on you, an unnamed protagonist who, after playing the video game and freeing the demon Pazuzu, you go on a quest to defeat Baal and later get dressed into a conflict between Lucifer and the one true god. What made this sequel good was the fact that it improved the gameplay of the first game while still keeping it familiar. Plus, instead of continuing to adapt Aya Nishitani's novels, the team behind the first game would aim to make an original story with the Megami Tensei name, and as you can tell by the small plot synopsis, this one was bigger in a lot of ways. And fun fact, this game marks the first time we see Kazuma Kaneko as the artist for the game, which overall has some great art, and whatever the fuck this is. Upon the game's release, it received critical acclaim, with many of the positive reception going towards the drastic improvements in gameplay and a story that represented the vague nature of morality, as well as the game's cyberpunk and occult influences.
Like last time, I'm going to be focusing on the version seen in Kyoku Megami Tensei. But before I do my final thoughts, I am going to be focusing on the differences between that version and the original NES version. So let's get on started with this review by looking into that story.
In 19XX, the world we knew ended.
Holy shit!
The game begins with us playing Devil Busters, where we meet our heroes for this story. For this, we're going to call our heroine Aya and our best friend Kaido. After distributing you and Aya's stats, we end up in Mekon City. Are you fucking kidding me? After going through Daedalus Tower and defeating the Minotaur, again, we end up freeing the demon Pazuzu, who calls our hero and Kaido the Messiahs, and gives us a rundown on what's been going on. 35 years has passed since the nuclear war effectively destroyed all of civilization. Since then, a portal from hell has brought demons to Tokyo, leading to humans having to go into shelters for safety. Pazuzu tells us that our mission is to defeat Baal, who is supposedly the one responsible for bringing demons to Tokyo. Pazuzu then gives us a demon summoning program and Kaido the ability to use magic, and later warns us about the shelter we're in being overrun by Nebulos. After defeating Nebulos, recruiting Orpheus, and retrieving the Solomon's Ring, we learn of a witch in Tokyo Tower with Pazuzu telling us to kill her. Once there, we encounter her and we're given the choice of fighting her or talking names out. By the way, do not fight her, she will rip your heart from your ass. Trust me. During the conversation, we learned that the witch was also fed the same info from Pazuzu, and soon comes to the realization that we were tricked by him. From this point, we end up siding with her and ditch her friend Kaido, which in retrospect is fucked up, but he takes half of our shit in Orpheus, so you know what, never mind, fuck him. The witch is revealed to be Aya, who we'll be rocking with for the rest of the game. After traveling around Tokyo, collecting different elemental tallies and killing demons, we reach Shinjuku and meet up with Mammon, who tells us that Pazuzu's real plan is to have us kill Baal so he can rule over Tokyo. With this knowledge, he tells us to kill Pazuzu and bring his head to him, giving us an item to break into Shinjuku. Once there, we meet up with Kaido, who sicks Orpheus on us, which we killed very quickly. Damn, that's actually kinda sad, I'm not gonna lie to you. Anyway, we face Pazuzu, curve stomp his ass, and take his head to Mammon, only for him to try to fight us.
You lie!
With Pazuzu dead, we only have one thing left to do, kill Baal, which requires us to hold the story again. For what, you may ask? To have a monk test us by sending us to hell and being swallowed by a big ass turtle with only means of escape being an old man who wants half of my money. Oh, bastard. After reaching Baal's Disneyland looking ass castle and climbing it, we encounter Kaido again for another fight with his demons. But after defeating them, we walk into Baal's room to find Kaido dead, and now we must avenge our fallen friend. Your warranty on life has expired, you. Oh, what the fuck? Bale's defeated and turns into a frog for some reason, and you're given an option to squash him or take him with you. Believe it or not, this is very important as this game is the first in the series to introduce multiple endings. In this case, squashing him results in the bad ending and later on makes the game a whole lot harder. So for the sake of ease, simplicity, and me not trying to lose my goddamn sanity, we're not killing him. Okay, let's summarize these events real quick. We killed Pazuzu, we defeated Bale, and our best friend is now dead. So, what do we do now? Well, ladies and gentlemen, only one place to go. Hell, yes! Yep, after defeating Pazuzu and Bale, we go to hell in order to kill the true enemy of the game, which we don't know who the fuck that may be, but screw it, we'll figure it out. We go through hell ripping and tearing our way to an answer, and in the process save both Izanami and Izanagi, with the latter having no fanfare at all. After encountering Beelzebub, which Jesus Christ, that's just a recipe for a nightmare, Bale joins with him to turn to Ball. Very important, mind you, and you'll soon see why. We meet up with Izanami, who transports us to Lucifer's temple for a final showdown, and after climbing to the man himself, Lucifer gives us a rundown on the true enemy of the game being the one true God. Why can't I say his fucking name? After the explanation, if you have Ball with you, he'll end up joining your party. That's pretty cool. I wonder how powerful he is.
What the?
I am glad I did not have to fight him. After our destructive trip through hell, we head to the Suzuki company to fight Satan, who's working with the one true God. Once that long ass battle ends, we get transported to an unknown area and come face to face with Blueface.
My pistol bloated, ready to unload it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted an excuse to do that. Oh, goddamn. But yes, this is the one true God who gives us a choice to either repent or run the man's fate. And want to know what I picked? To just repent. Yeah, surprisingly, you can just say fuck fighting God and join him, where he creates a 1,000-year kingdom for you and Aya. But this is far from a satisfying ending, so time to beat his ass. We beat God, and afterwards he warns us that even though he may have been defeated, as long as there are people who believe in him, he'll always come back. Soon we end up back in the shelter, and with the portal to the demon world sealed, the world is finally at peace. Oh, and we find out that the Devil Buster game was made by Nakajima. He's sick, sick man. But hey, that's a story for Megami Tensei 2, and I mean, it's not extraordinary, and for an NES game, I'm fine with that. As a sequel, the story properly ramps up the scale of conflict, not just in the enemies, but in the location as well. The funny thing is that, having played the newer Mega 10 games, I could definitely see the game's influences on the first SMT and the other subsequent ones. Now, my only issues with the story is that, how are we supposed to know Satan was the member of the Suzuki company? Small, I know, but it sort of broke my immersion for the game.
Now, after the gameplay, it ended up getting a lot of improvements and some new additions.
Everything you've seen in the first Megami Tensei is here in full force. There's random encounters, you can negotiate with enemies, can allocate points to one of 5 different stats, etc, etc. But now things don't feel like a fucking gauntlet and isn't as limited. There's also a bunch of new demons in this game that are able to be recruited and fused. Also, Jack Frost makes his debut in this game just without the hee-ho. But the new additions is where this game truly shines. First, we have a world map which is pretty big. In the map, there are major locations which houses different shops, casinos, a healing spring, and the Cathedral of Shadows. But there's also a special area known as terminals, which can transport you from one major area to the next after visiting them. These places also allow you to save your progress and are plentiful, so you don't have to worry about not having a place to save. Second is the Cathedral of Shadows, which actually got an upgrade. Like last time, you could fuse 2 demons together to create a stronger one. However, there's also a triple fusion system which allows you to fuse 3 demons together to create an even stronger demon. But this is very underutilized and vague, as only having certain demons will allow you to do this, and the game doesn't really hint to those combinations. Third are some of the new spells introduced. These new spells include a higher level of healing magic, revival magic, and offensive magic, and there's an instant death spell known as Mudo. Finally, we have the new equipment being a gun. As you explore the game, you'll come across weapon stores that'll sell you guns, which are great but sometimes underutilized as a number of enemies are strong against it. But for some bizarre reason, that means in order to get a sword, you have to fight enemies in order to get one. And some are great while others really aren't. Other than that, the game is largely the same, and with these additions and improvements, makes the game a lot easier to deal with.
Also, before I forget, let's go talk about grinding and this little auto option you might have seen before.
In terms of grinding, the most you'll be doing it for is money because armors and weapons can get very expensive. But when grinding for levels, they're relatively quick and easy if you stick by a town with a healing spring or a terminal. As for this little auto option, the option pretty much makes battles quicker with everyone attacking. Now the reason why I forgot to mention this in the last video is because 1, I didn't use it a lot, and 2, it's this little stipulation to it. Once you select the option, you won't be able to use any other attack unless you spam the fuck out of the B button, and I advise only using this for grinding as sometimes there are enemies that have abilities that will make your life a living nightmare, like reflecting physical attacks or using instant death spells, which was a result of a number of deaths in this game while grinding.
Speaking of this game being easier, let's talk about the dungeons in this game.
Compared to the 6 dungeons in the first Megami Tensei 2 has over 24 dungeons. Technically 27, but 3 of them are optional, and for this, let's just talk about some of the standouts. The first dungeon in the game, being Daedalus Tower, surprised the fuck out of me. I was upset at first having to go through this hellhole again, but I quickly found out that this dungeon was a lot easier, with only being 4 floors to get to the Minotaur. If you played the first game, then this section should be an absolute breeze. If not, you should still have a good time nonetheless. Igebukuro is the 10th dungeon in this game and is where you get the Mercury Pillar. Now in order to get it, you have to stick your arm in this wall to get it, and your reward for doing so is surprise, shawty! Yeah, you lose your fucking arm, and fun fact, you have to go back to Ginza to get a new arm from the scientist, only to find out that that motherfucker was charging 5,000 manga just to get it. And once you get the arm, the only benefit is that you get to summon 10 demons instead of 7. Christ, that was something else. Now, up until Shinjuku, most of the dungeons are pretty quick and easy to go through, but Shinjuku was the first dungeon that almost gave me an aneurysm. And this is all because of the enemies that can give you status ailments and the glorious trap floors. Okay, but once we get to Pazuzu for the first time in a while, he took a bit to beat as he had a lot of health and was doing some damage. After killing him, there's an optional dungeon in Shibuya. In order to unlock this dungeon, you have to talk to this dude in Nakano who gives you access to the intelligent building in Shibuya. Go there and you can go back into the Devil Buster game and pick up Cerberus, who was a lot more powerful than in the first Megami Tensei, making the later portions of the game easier. Just know you'll have to be around level 40 to recruit him. There's also another task you can do to get the Devil Analyzer, but I didn't care to go through it. And heads up, the intelligent building is filled with turrets, so prepare your chest for a lot of bullets. Next is Bale's Castle, where I was about to flip my damn desk over as all the issues of the Shinjuku dungeon was here in full fucking force, but now there's a damn maze to deal with that has trap floors as well, and Bale was just an endurance fight just cause he had a shit ton of HP. But after that hellhole, we now get to go to Hell itself, which pissed me off on a whole nother level, cause here in good old Hell, we get reintroduced to enemies that can permanently decrease your level. And for 2 of the major areas we're going to, you have to have an Undyne and a Gnome. Getting the demons was luckily easy, but there's a 3rd optional demon to have being Sylph, which can be fused from a Leo or Arrow and an Okupete. I don't even know how to fucking pronounce this. I'm gonna stop trying. But long story short, this took me 20 minutes before I just said fuck it and joined them to join me. Okay, but for real though, let's get back to the dungeons themselves. Sorrow Valley is the RPG equivalent to Death Mountain from Zelda 2. I say this because this whole dungeon is you going from cave to cave in order to reach the boss. And speaking of bosses, the boss battle of Asmodeus is where the bosses start to become a little harder to deal with. Crazy Plains was relatively easy, though sometimes going from one floor to the next was annoying, but Belial was just curb stomping my ass with some heavy ass boots, so from here I had to grind a lot just to beat him and deal with the dungeon itself. Rifleland was tedious as hell, but luckily was quick and easy to go through. There's a cave section that's big, but the enemies luckily didn't give me any issue, and the dungeon itself being Molech's temple is only 1 floor. But this dungeon does have some stuff to do, like getting the revival incense to revive Izanami, and you can say this dude's kid from the temple, and he gives you the key to the 2nd optional dungeon in the game, which gives you the Varha sword, or Varha. Anyway, but I didn't go for it because the sword I had was just ripping through some bitches. Now, this section right here made me want to scream to the top of my fucking lungs. This part is the Lost Woods, and I'm not referring to Zelda. You see, there is one last optional dungeon you can go to which has the strongest armor of the game, the Lucifer armor. But in order to get it, the game devs decided that in order for one to get this powerful armor, they have to put their balls on a hot ass pan to sing the knife song without stabbing their dick. For anyone that's any bit curious in doing this dungeon, just know that the potential for you destroying something in your room is high, because this dungeon has a fuck ton of trap floors and you need to do this before going to Astaroth's castle. Why, you may ask? Well, when you get near his castle, he'll knock you out and kidnap Aya, meaning you have to solo this dungeon and the boss without her. Mind you, Aya has power, which makes every dungeon easier to navigate, and for me, she had the most MP for healing, so I thought that this is where I was gonna say fuck it and drop the game. However, it wasn't that bad in retrospect, as I had the Sword Knight, which could be freed with a sylph, and that bitch was level 60, and Kakuri Hibe, who has Diaron and Samaricon. Plus, Astaroth was just a fucking pushover.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Malfear was easy, but the Dark World map and the maze to get to Beelzebub felt like unneeded padding. And finally, Lucifer's Temple, which was very easy, but scary because some of the enemies there had some strong ass attacks. But the final dungeon, Suzuki's Company, was annoying yet bizarre, as the 4th basement level was a fucking maze to go through and had damaged tiles practically everywhere, which was annoying as hell. Satan himself was a tough battle. He hit like a tank, had a lot of health, and killed some of my demons, plus myself and Aya. Luckily, Bale was there with the strongest healing magic in the game, thank fucking god. As for the one true god, it was basically the same case. Overall, most of the dungeons don't really overstay their welcome. Some are a lot more tedious and has some annoying design philosophies, but again are quick. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but the majority of the bosses, with the exception of Pazuzu, Bale, Belial, Satan, and the one true god, was a fucking pushover. If anyone has played through this game, let me know y'all experience in the comments.
So this game was pretty easy to go through, but also very tedious at times, many times mind you. But before I give you guys my final thoughts, I want to actually talk about the original real quick.
Back in the last video, I briefly mentioned the NES version of Megami Tensei, which I stated had better music and shop graphics, but I wouldn't play it because of how dark everything was. In retrospect, that actually was kind of fucking stupid. As I was recording footage for this game, a fan translation of the NES version was released, with the people behind it being Pennywise, Tom, ABW, and Flash PV.
As such, I wanted to fully check out this version to see which version is the best to play. Is it the version seen on the NES or the version on Kyoyaku Megami Tensei? Well, let's go and check it out, shall we?
To get things out of the way, Kyoyaku has a bunch of quality of life improvements. Similar to the first Megami Tensei, many of the dungeons were reworked to be quicker and battles were made to be less tedious. But compared to the original, it feels empty in some parts, mainly some of the graphics and music. In the NES version, they had a sound chip which improved the quality of the music, which is apparent as fuck, as Tsukasa Masuka, the composer for this game, gives these songs a lot of energy to them. Kyoyaku's soundtrack was remade by composer Hitoshi Sakamoto, who you may know as being the composer for Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy XII. Comparing the original and remade soundtrack to each other, Kyoyaku isn't as energetic and sounds almost as basic as people who only play multiplayer games. As for graphics, the world map in Kyoyaku creates an unsettling atmosphere and has a lot of dark colors that brings out the apocalypse of this world. But in some ways, the original has that feeling more consistently, with examples being the intro sequence coming to the start screen, as well as some of the shop graphics. With Kyoyaku, it feels like SMT1, which I know was the whole purpose for remastering the games, but it doesn't have the character of the original, with examples being the terminals, which in the original were known as checkmates. As for the gameplay, that's where things become tricky. The major drawbacks of the NES versions you're going to face is the lack of quality of life improvements, which if you're not used to old school JRPGs on the NES, you're gonna hate this version. But if you can endure these issues, then this version is pretty cool. Yo, so this is a little quick editor's note that I wanted to do to go more in detail for the NES version of Megami Tensei, because it's one thing to just talk about like, okay, graphics, music, and so on and so forth, and the overall vibe, but it's another thing to go and talk about the gameplay. And Megami Tensei 2 on the NES, the original version, it's rough. It's very rough. Oh boy. Alright, so Megami Tensei 2 on the NES is very, very rough. And there's a lot of great things beyond the gameplay. Like, for example, I ended up finding out a secret during my NES playthrough, which you can actually go to hell in Shibuya if you go counterclockwise in the Hachiko statue in Shibuya. I said Shibuya twice, what the hell. And while the secret is cool, there is nothing that will make this version forgivable with the fact of, hey, there's an abundance of fucking enemy encounters. Because you see, in Kyoku, it was perfectly fine. You know, you could deal with it. Enemies were fairly weak, still strong, but fairly weak. And you could get through the dungeon just like that. But in the original NES version, that's not the case. Because every other step, you're facing an enemy. Not as bad as Megami Tensei 1, but still pretty fucking bad. And not only that, for example, Ginza. Ginza was the one place in which was easy in Kyoku, but was hard as hell in the NES version. Yeah, so that basically was the gameplay overview of the NES version of Megami Tensei 2. It's rough, it's tedious. Basically, you're kind of glad that you have the quality of life improvements from Kyoku, even though Kyoku, like in terms of everything else, like graphics, music, and charm and stuff, is not really there. But Jesus Christ. So yeah, if you are looking to play the NES version, beware, that's all I'm gonna say. But let's go on and get on with his final thoughts. It's 2 in the morning, I'm tired. I want to end this so badly. Megami Tensei 2 was an easier experience compared to the first game, yet still tedious enough to almost make me rip my hair out. When going through this game, it felt like the development team carefully examined what made the first game successful and made improvements to areas that weren't so great, with varying degrees of success. The story is simple yet very subtle in its themes. The music is really good, and while I'm not a fan of the SNES version, it at least has more tracks than the first game. And the gameplay was solid, yet it had pitfalls such as the triple fusion and the dungeon design. But nonetheless, this game was a lot of fun to go through, and I think it may be a good place to start if you want to play older Megaten games.
As for the verdict, should you play Megami Tensei 2? Maybe.
Again, let me stress this real quick. This game is an old school JRPG on the NES, meaning a lot of the design choices are archaic and annoying as fuck no matter what version you play.
So here's the thing. If you want the quality of life improvements, then play the version on Kyoku. Now, if you are fine without these improvements, then play the original on the NES via the fan translation I mentioned before. Oh, by the way, if you want a smoother experience when trying to look for the elemental tallies or the orbs in hell, then I recommend playing this with a guide. Other than that, this is the first time I'm saying this in a long while, but you do not need a guide to be able to play Digital Devil Story 2 Megami Tensei. Fuck it. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching to the end of the video. Next up is the first SN2 game that I ever played, Shin Megami Tensei. And hopefully this video comes out a little faster than this one, but we'll have to see how my classes are set up and stuff. Yeah. Oh boy. Like always, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make sure to stay safe and stay by my guys. Like, for real, like, put a mask on, all that good stuff. Yeah, please don't get COVID.